Hi guys. So again, this is Will, finishing the second part of the analysis on the legislation for the Yale Invitational. So in the first video, we discussed the legislation for semifinals. Now we're going to be talking about the legislation for finals. And I think that this legislation is some of the most interesting legislation I've seen since I've started to read legislative packets, but definitely will lead to good, substantial debate. I think there's a lot of arguments on each piece of legislation that all of you guys can make. Firstly, starting with the legislation concerning the creation of a global asteroid defense system. So, a little background on the legislation. The legislation is relatively straightforward. It provides for the creation of a system that will redirect or destroy asteroids that are coming close to the United States or threaten global security. So, not just the U.S., but global security on the whole is being protected, allegedly, hopefully, under this legislation. So, it uses NASA and the DoD, Department of Defense, for implementation. The system of diverting or destroying these asteroids will happen through the launching of a nuclear weapon that will destroy or divert the course of one of these asteroids. So there is we're creating a system through this legislation to divert or destroy these asteroids, but the system is actually explained in the legislation, and it deals with setting aside 20 nuclear warheads for the purpose of removing or diverting these asteroids. Additionally, there are a few other programs that are implemented if we pass the legislation. One of these is that NASA will also be responsible for developing satellites to track asteroids, and that the Department of Defense will be required to perform a study trying to find how else we can divert these nuclear weapons these asteroids other than having to use a nuclear warhead. So, what's the problem and how does this legislation solve it? So I think the problem is pretty clear. It's the perceived global threat from asteroids. You could contend that this is a relatively legitimate fear, even if it's not a short-term fear. It's certainly a long-term fear. NBC reported in last October that not only did a large asteroid barely avoid colliding with Earth, but that it'll possibly and likely hit us on its return trip when it comes back towards back towards Earth. And in this instance, when they say the word likely, likely basically means there's like a 1 in 300 to 400 chance of this happening. So that's still, by our standards, relatively unlikely, but normally asteroids hitting the Earth have like a 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100,000 chance. So this is a significantly more likely event that would occur. And this would happen in 2032. So yeah, it's a long-term problem, but still, the destruction of Earth and all humanity, whether it's like in the short term or the long term, is pretty serious. Also, it's not. This fear definitely isn't unfounded. Other countries and other organizations have started to try to provide for the creation of a system on their own that will fight against asteroids. The article goes on to say, NBC goes on to say that Russia, and more impressively and surprisingly, the United Nations are both taking seriously the threat to asteroids and are looking at implementing, either on the nation scale or the international scale, some sort of system to handle asteroids colliding with Earth. So the fact that the UN is now actually studying and trying to implement a program with support from other countries to handle the problem of asteroids is pretty considerable. So the threat to both the United States and the rest of the world is at least partially real, and this bill attempts to solve that problem. As I said, it creates a new system for combating these asteroids using nuclear weapons to either divert or destroy the asteroid. And the important thing here is that we're going from having nothing to having something. So currently the U.S. has no, at least public program known to the public, as to how they're going to divert or destroy asteroids that could hit Earth. So we don't know of any program. We probably don't have one. This legislation at least provides something, some sort of program to be prepared in the future in the event that an asteroid hits Earth. So, what are some of the positive impacts of passing this legislation? First, and obviously, it avoids an asteroid collision with the Earth, saving millions of lives, saving millions of American lives, saving millions of lives all around the globe. Obviously, a strong impact to passing any legislation is that it saves American lives. If we're representatives of the American people, they're our constituents. We are obligated to act in their best interests